Hey everyone, I'm Chelsea from BuildBook Support Team, and today we're going to go over how you can build your schedule. So, first off, I like to say that schedules are only available in our projects. They're not available to create anywhere else. So, you can't go to the global schedule tab right here to try to create a schedule. You're going to have to go through and manage those individually within the projects. To start, you're going to click on the schedule tab. And once you've clicked on this tab, you'll be shown the Gantt chart immediately. So right off the bat, the default view for our schedule is the schedule view, which is a Gantt chart. But if you don't like working the Gantt chart, you can always switch over to that calendar view and build your schedule here. I'm going to build the schedule here in the Gantt chart because I am a more visual person, and this is where I like to build things to see how they're kind of lining out. Now, to start, our schedule is made up of two different components, a phase and then a task. You can actually build your schedule however you want to, so you can just use all phases, you can just use all tasks, or you can use a combination of both like I'm going to. But the difference between the two is that phases are going to represent the high-level overview of your project. They're going to essentially give people a timeline of how long a certain set of the project might take. So for example, a phase might be something like demolition and site prep. It could be excavation and foundation. Framing is another option. And these are going to represent those kind of high levels of framing we expect to take from this time to this time. Tasks, on the other hand, are going to be a little bit more granular. These are going to be the tasks for those specific phases in order for them to complete. An example might be you have a framing phase, and the tasks inside of that phase might be you need to rough-in for your HVAC, you need to rough-in for electrical and plumbing. You have a framing inspection that you have to complete and finish in order to move on to the next set of things. Those are going to be those granular to-dos that tasks are designed to track. The reason why I'm telling you this now is because this is really dependent on how your client is going to view this schedule. So for example, your client is automatically shown phases on the schedule, but they're not shown tasks. So depending on how you create your schedule, that's really going to show exactly how the client can view it. And that's why I like to go through it first, because again, clients can see phases automatically, but they don't see tasks. You have to share those tasks with the client. And so in that case, that could be a little bit of a precursor onto how you want to build your schedule. I'm going to use a traditional example today of building our schedule with phases and tasks. To start, I like to also check my working days as well as my schedule dependency mode behavior. So to do that, I'm going to click on this little ellipsis menu in the top right corner and click on schedule options. This is going to take me to a few different options. So the first option here is going to be selecting your dependency behavior. And I have a video that goes over every single piece of these dependency behaviors, but essentially a high-level overview is this is going to depend, or this setting is going to depend on how your predecessors and successors react within the schedule. The default is always going to be fixed, and fixed mode allows you to kind of create lag and overlap items without having to override anything, and then move those entire items in one big piece. But there are some caveats to the fixed mode that the auto mode actually kind of addresses. Auto mode is going to be a little bit more like a traditional Gantt chart, where you create your dependencies and they essentially fall back behind each other. And then you can override things like negative lag, so you can overlap behaviors and do things like that. These two modes right off the bat work with working days. So as long as you have your working days set, just like I do, I'm working Monday through Friday, I'm not working Sunday through Saturday, then this particular calendar mode or dependency modes right here will take that into consideration. If you use the ignore mode, which is a little bit more of like a manual process for things, you won't necessarily have this option in here. It will essentially reset your schedule to go through Saturday and Sunday, even if you're not working those days. And it's designed to do that because this mode essentially ignores all of the rules of any type of Gantt chart. So once I have my working day selected and I have my dependency mode selected, I can then comfortably go through and build my schedule. Again, the reason why I'm going to go through this first is because you're not able to switch back and forth through modes on the schedule. So if you have an auto mode currently and then you switch back to fixed, you're going to see a lot of issues within the schedule and things falling out of place or moving around quite a bit. And that's because the rules here between the two are completely different. So you want to just make sure that whatever schedule mode you're currently in is the schedule mode that you feel most comfortable in. And if you want to, you can always create many different projects with the different modes installed so you can see which one you exactly like the best. Now that I've had my schedule and stuff set up, I'm going to click on Save Calendar Settings. And since I've already done that, it's not going to highlight for me. And then I can exit out of this. To start, I'm going to select the Add New in the top left corner, and I'm going to click on Phase. I like to add my phases pretty much all at the same exact time. And I'm going to show you the tips and tricks that I use in order to add these phases so that I don't have to go back and try to decipher information later. So to start, we'll make just phase 1. And then the date range, you can either set as your entire phase date range if you want to, but I'm not going to in this case. I'm just going to set it as a day, and I'm going to show you why here in just a second. The status for the phases are incomplete or complete. Typically, when you're building your schedule, everything is going to remain in incomplete because it hasn't been started. You can add an optional description, so this will be seen by the client so they can see what this particular phase entails or what the description is. Once you've added your first phase, you'll notice that there are the schedule button right here isn't accessible to you. And that's because you're going to have to add a few more phases or a few more items in order for this to pop up so that you can create dependencies. Finally, the activities on the phase are where you can essentially add a list of the tasks that are going to be completed in the phase. So if you don't want to share your tasks with your client, this is a really easy way for them to see what kind of tasks technically go into the phase, but you're not sharing things like dates, due dates, anything like that. So you can optionally add those activities here in the phase, and your clients will definitely see that. Now, if you want to essentially bulk add, like I'm about to do, you can click on Save and add another. But if you're just doing like one phase at a time, you can just click on Save. We'll add the next one, phase 2. And what you're immediately going to see is that the date range populates to the very next workable day. So you'll notice that this has populated now to August 30th, which is Friday for me. It's still a workable day. And this is essentially saying that the next available day to have this phase worked on is August 30th. Now that I've created another phase, this is where I can create my predecessors and successors. So I can add phase 1 as my predecessor to this phase. And that way, if I need to move my schedule back, I can take phase 1, move it all the way back, and that is going to move phase 2. I'm not going to actually create these dependencies yet because I want to create more of my phases and see how they lay out. And then once I've created my phases and I've added my tasks to them, that's where I'll go ahead and create those dependencies. And then we'll just do 3. Again, this is going to move my date to the next workable date. Now you'll notice that here in America, September 2nd is a holiday. It's Labor Day here. And we don't have the ability to shut off holidays on our schedule. We have many, many pros who use BuildBook across internationally, essentially. And those holidays are different for everybody. So if you have holidays that you turned off in here, it would turn them off for essentially everybody else in that case. So we don't have the option to turn off holidays, but what you can do is just click on the very next day, click on apply, and then save your phase. So now you'll notice that my phases kind of lay out just like so. And again, the reason why I've created these phases as just a single day is because as I go through and I add tasks to my phases are actually going to become dependent on the tasks within inside. So I'll show you a quick little example of this. This task 1. We can set the due date. And then down here in every single one of the tasks, you're going to have some icons. I can add my scheduling to this task. So essentially, I can add this task or group it within a phase. Now, when I group this task within this phase, you're going to notice that this phase has now elongated from 1 day to 2 days. And again, that's because this particular phase is now dependent on this task. This is what we call a parent-child relationship. So think about your child in a grocery store, and they're running off to a different department in the grocery store. You're not usually just going to let them run off. You're going to follow them. Essentially, your time becomes dependent on where your child goes within that realm. This is the same exact thing here. This phase is now the parent to these tasks. And in order for this phase to get complete, or for anything to happen with this phase, the tasks have to be completed. And additionally, you'll see if I move this task, this phase is going to move with it at any point in time, and it's designed to do so. I can optionally add additional tasks to my phase, so I can go through and add task 2. I can add the due date that I want to. Maybe I want this to be 3 days now. I can again select it and add it to the phase. And additionally, what I can do is I can add my successors or my predecessors. So maybe I want task 1 to be the predecessor to task 2. Essentially, what the predecessors and successors are doing is they're saying that this task, task 1, has to end before task 2, the successor, can begin. Now, there is an override option for this, so maybe I need task 1 and task 2 to start on the exact same day. You'll notice that there's a minimum lag right here on the auto schedule that allows you to control this. So now I can make this task -3 days if I needed to, and that will allow me to drag that task back so that it butts up or overlaps at the same time. Click on save. And again, what you'll notice is that the phase has now elongated. And additionally, what you'll see is there's a dependency. This little arrow marking essentially says that there's a dependency between these two items right here. Now, again, what you'll notice is that even though I put in that negative lag time, this doesn't move the task, and it's not designed to. The auto schedule rules here are that task 1 has to end before task 2 can begin. And if I want to override that, I want to manually override that by dragging the task back. So for example, I can go in here, I can set my minimum lag, can click off, and I can move the task back up to 3 days. So I can move it back to here if I wanted to. I could even move it back to here if I wanted to. Now, what you'll notice is as I move this task, it elongated. The reason for this is because I moved this task over non-working days. We're not able to shut off those working days on the schedule. So if you have Saturday and Sunday that you don't work, you'll notice that they just gray out. They don't fall off of the schedule. And again, the schedule is designed to do that, essentially saying that this task is going to go over that time period, but the only days that are actually worked within this task are 3 days. So the duration might be 5 days, but the workable days on this task are only 3 days. And that's essentially just telling you that this task, it doesn't actually need to be worked over Saturday and Sunday. The 3 days of workable time is perfectly fine. I can also move this task back at any point in time, and when I do that, you'll notice it shrinks back down to the normal 3 days that it was. Let's say I add a task, and I don't actually add that task to a phase. I have forgotten it. I'm like, oh no, I've saved it, and my task is just sitting there. The way to tell if a task is actually within a phase is over here in the item column. The phases or the tasks that are in the phase are indented. So you'll notice that these are perfectly indented right here. And then this task is not. It's kind of just by itself. A lot of the times what you'll notice too is if there is a task created and it doesn't belong to phase, it might actually end up falling down here to the bottom. And that again is designed, it's just basically there to tell you that there are tasks here but they're not actually connected to anything. And so therefore, we essentially break them out for you so it's easier to see. But it's really easy for me to add my task to the phase. I have two options of doing this. I can either click on the task, click on scheduling, and add it to the phase here. Or once a task is created, I can actually add it to the phase from the phase. You'll notice that any tasks that are not currently not currently added to phases but are created will show up in the add more option on the phase. So now I have the ability to add task 3. I can add task 3 to the phase. And now this add more option has been grayed out. Again, tasks are not able to be created from the phases. They have to be created individually in and of themselves. So they can either be created here by clicking on add new in task, or additionally, you can optionally add tasks right here in the task tab and start creating your tasks through here. Now, once I have my task kind of set up, I can then use my schedule to essentially create those dependencies. I don't have to go within the task to create those dependencies necessarily if I don't want to, but in auto schedule, if you do have tasks that are going to be overlapping, it's usually easier to create those dependencies within this modal. That way you can set your minimum lag days. Whereas if you don't, and you simply just create the dependency by clicking and holding on this right little bubble and dragging it down to the task, that it will automatically butt that task up based on the rules of the schedule. So if I try to go back and drag that task so that it overlaps in any way, I won't be able to do that. I'll have to first install that negative lag. So I can then go in and install minimum lag. Additionally, you can add positive lag. So maybe I actually don't need this task to start directly after task 2 ends. Maybe I want it to start about 3 or 4 days later. Once I add that minimum lag here, you'll notice that it has now pushed that task out to be up to 4 days later. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then anytime I move my phase within this, it will keep that dependency. So it'll keep that lag right there. This is why I like to build my schedule also as phases. So for example, if I'm moving my entire schedule back several weeks, the easiest way for me to do that is by the phase. I can literally click on this particular phase. I can move it up. I can move it down. I can move it wherever I want, and the tasks inside will remain the same. If I try to move a task inside of this instead of the phase, like I want to move task 1 back, it will allow me to, but depending on the dependencies that I have in here, it may not make sense. So in that case, what you can do is just move the entire phase really easily. And then as you'll see, now that I've been moving things around, this task is way out there. So what we can do is we can just use our auto schedule, all successors, and pull that task back to the appropriate place. One of the reasons why I like to create my phases and then create my tasks and then go through and do my phase dependencies is, again, now I can really easily see what everything looks like. So we'll add a few more tasks to these lesser phases. We'll select our date range. We'll do the 29th through the 3rd. We'll add one more task. Back to the phase. And then we'll do the 4th through the 6th. Go save. And now again, like I said, I can kind of see how everything is laying out. Now that I have kind of my phases and my tasks set up, and I've already kind of started creating my dependencies, I can then create dependencies between the phases. So once I create this dependency between the phase, by holding this little button and dragging it down to the other phase. Now when I move this particular phase around, it's also going to move this one around. Something that you'll notice right off the bat is that it did move my tasks inside, and that's because I didn't have any dependencies set up on these tasks. So one of the things about the schedule is it is heavily dependency based. And that means that once I start compressing information on the schedule, if something doesn't have a dependency, it's basically saying, well, we just want those tasks to essentially start at the same time because they're moving something back. Whereas if I create this dependency between the two tasks, I can then move this phase back, move that phase, and you'll notice that it didn't compress anything. And it's again designed like that because the rule here for the auto schedule at least is that this phase just has to end before this phase can begin. It doesn't matter when the tasks necessarily start inside of it if there are no dependencies. It is essentially designed to just push information across the board. So if you see that, it's likely because you don't have dependencies set up between the tasks. And if that's the case, I would either just set up those dependencies or remove those tasks to however you want. Now, again, you'll notice things that don't have dependencies, like phase 3 down here is still kind of living in its own little world where I had it originally scheduled. And that's because, again, there are no dependencies. So if you're pushing your schedule back and you're noticing that things are left behind, it's likely because it has nothing dependent on it. And in that case, it's not designed to move. You're going to want to either move this one further back, like so, or you're going to want to create the dependency like so that you can see it moved back. Now, sometimes when you're working with your schedule, just like I am, I'm moving things around a lot. I'm kind of putting things in places that I want to go in places. And you'll notice that sometimes it throws your schedule out of order. That is totally fine. We have a couple of ways that you can combat that. So you can either click on the start column to reorder the schedule. You can even see how the schedule is going backwards if you want to. You can leave it like that. Or additionally, one of the other things that you can do is just refresh the page. As I'm working through my schedule, I do refresh the page after about 5 or 6 different tasks or dependencies that I've created. And the biggest reason why is because different sets of teams have different schedules. And so we're expecting that you're going to have a medium schedule. So probably anywhere between 5 to 10 phases and maybe 5 to 10 tasks per phase. But we do have people who have much larger schedules. And in that case, this schedule is designed to essentially cache some of that information and kind of hold on to it. And so I like to refresh my screen pretty often so that I know whatever I'm looking at is the actual place that this particular item is in. Whereas if I've been working on this for, a good 3 hours and then I refresh, I might see that some things are moved around a little bit. And that's because we are taking that into account on the back end, but it's not always showing up here on the front end. And so again, I like to refresh my schedule quite constantly just so I know that everything is laying in place the way I want it to. One of the last things I want to go over is how auto schedule works within particular sets of overrides. So, auto schedule again is a dependency behavior. This is a more traditional Gantt chart behavior. For most Gantt charts, this is how they're going to react. You're going to have task one, and task one is usually set to end before task two can begin. But we have given you the override in order to overlap them. And that's going to be in the form of those minimum lag days right here so that you can go in and essentially drag and drop items. However, if you use this auto schedule all successors on tasks that are overlapping, so I'll show you really quickly here. What you'll notice is that this particular schedule is going to essentially get reset. and it's going to reset based on those parameters that are the scheduling rules. So again, if I click here, I click on auto schedule, I click on all successors, you'll notice that it moves this back out to butt up to the task. So again, this is one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at your schedule. It didn't do this for this one down here because these are not the successors to these tasks right here. They belong to a different phase. So this is kind of how I get away with some of that finagling. I'm able to just do this within phases rather than, across the board on everything. But again, all you have to do is if you use that option, you just got to drag your task back. And then if you had a task that had lag time out here, you can just use that all successors again on this particular task to move everything back the way you want it to. That's one of the caveats about auto schedule that some people don't like is that it doesn't necessarily maintain that negative lag. It always maintains the positive lag, but because the negative lag is technically an override here, it's not going to maintain it for you. Hopefully that goes through some of the issues or some of the tips and tricks as far as the schedule goes. But if you ever have any questions, feel free to click on this question mark help icon and we can jump in at any point in time with our team to go over any of the issues that you might be facing or any of the things that you get stuck on. Additionally, I do have an overview that goes through all of the little buttons and what they kind of do up here. So feel free to check out that scheduling overview in order to see what that looks like and how things work. As always, happy building.